Florida has over 22 million residents. That is a massive amount of people. But if you look closer, something is seriously broken. Almost 82% of the entire population is crammed into the bottom half of the state. While cities like Miami and Orlando are exploding with skyscrapers and non-stop traffic, the North looks like a total ghost town. Most of you think Florida is all palm trees and ocean breezes, but the North is actually more like Alabama or Georgia than the Florida you see on TV. It's a complete geographic flip. How did this happen? Why is the top of the state so empty while the bottom is bursting at the seams? To solve this mystery, we have to look at the three things that changed everything. 1. The hidden geology. What's under the dirt matters. 2. The invention of air conditioning, the ultimate game changer. And 3. Wild historical shift, the flip that moved millions. I'm going to show you exactly why North Florida is basically abandoned and how the Sunshine State completely flipped upside down. To understand why northern Florida is so empty, we have to look at the ground itself. You won't believe how different the geography is. In the south, you have those iconic, wide sandy beaches and a limestone foundation that allows for massive development. But in the north, specifically the Panhandle, it is a completely different story. The coastline there isn't just beaches, it's a massive network of marshes, swamps, and dense wetlands. It is incredibly difficult and expensive to build houses on a swamp. While the South has been drained and paved over for decades, the North remains rugged and wild. And get this, the entire state is built on a massive platform of limestone. But in the North, that limestone is covered by thick clay and different soil types that just aren't as friendly for massive suburban sprawl. Florida has 1,350 miles of coastline, which is more than almost any other state. But in the north, a lot of that coastline is protected or simply unbuildable. You literally can't put a high-rise on a salt marsh without it sinking into the mud. It's geography versus destiny, and so far, the geography is winning big. Wait, it gets even crazier when you look at the weather. People think all of Florida is a tropical paradise, but northern Florida is a massive target for some of the most intense hurricanes in history. Because of how the Gulf of Mexico is shaped, the Panhandle acts like a giant funnel for storms. And here is the kicker. Florida is the flattest state in the country. The highest point in the entire state of Florida is called Britton Hill, and it is only 345 feet above sea level. That is it. That's the peak. In the north, even a small amount of sea level rise or a storm surge can flood thousands of acres of land instantly. Because the north has a slightly higher elevation than the south in some spots, you'd think it would be safer, but the terrain actually makes it harder to drain after a big storm. The risk factor is off the charts. People want to live where they feel safe, and seeing a hurricane wipe out a town every few years keeps the population low. While people in the south build higher, the north remains vulnerable, and that scares away the developers. Now let's talk about the money. Economics is the real reason cities grow, and northern Florida is in a brutal competition. It just can't win. Look at the map again. Southern Florida has massive natural harbors that connect directly to the Caribbean and Latin America. Miami and Tampa became global shipping giants because they are perfectly positioned for trade. But northern Florida, it's stuck. To the west, you have the massive port of New Orleans, and to the east, you have Savannah and Charleston. Northern Florida is sandwiched between these giant economic engines, and it just can't compete. Why would a shipping company stop in a small northern Florida port when they can go to the massive infrastructure of New Orleans? It's a total economic squeeze. Because there aren't enough massive ports to drive industry. There aren't enough high-paying jobs to attract millions of people. It's a vicious cycle. No jobs means no people, and no people means no reason to build big industries. While the South was building skyscrapers and international trade hubs, the North was left relying on agriculture and timber, which just doesn't support millions. The United States is one of the largest countries in the world in terms of both size and population. However, the United States population is not evenly distributed across the country. While most people live on either the eastern half of the country or the west coast, there is a really large belt of land in the middle of the country that is almost entirely empty. Here is why this situation exists and persists. If you've ever seen a population map showing the distribution of people in the United States, you will know that most of the population and infrastructure is concentrated in the eastern half of the United States. But while that is an interesting story unto itself, what we're going to discuss today is a really large swath of land that runs from the northern border of Canada down to the southern border with Mexico that relatively few people live in. To understand this underpopulated belt, we have to first talk about the country's population distribution at large. The United States as a whole is very concentrated on the eastern half of the country. In fact, there is basically a line you can draw across the country that splits the contiguous United States in half. On the eastern side of this line, roughly 80% of the country's population lives, and on the western side, roughly 20% reside. The reason for this uneven distribution is largely due to a confluence of factors that includes the natural geography and where the United States began its existence as a nation. In both cases, the eastern half of the country is geographically less challenging to develop and settle. At the same time, it is also where the United States was first settled when it began as a series of colonies derived from the British Empire. This led to an earlier and easier development of the land, beginning on the East Coast and gradually moving inward. From there, the United States gradually expanded west. Beginning in 1803, the United States acquired a huge area of land from France that included much of the modern Midwest and western region of the country. This Louisiana purchase also aligned nicely with the Mississippi River watershed. This is a region so vast in its quantity of fresh water that it not only allowed for relatively easy irrigation of agricultural land, but it also allowed for trade and travel by ship across large distances. The combination of easy agriculture and easy transportation was a recipe for rapid development and population growth in those areas. At around the same time, development began to spur along the West Coast as well. San Francisco, for example, was officially incorporated in 1850, which was just 13 years after the city of Chicago started its significant growth. Los Angeles was incorporated in 1850 as well, and Portland, Oregon in 1851. The point being that development on the West Coast was not all that far behind the Midwest region. However, it was stymied by the lack of quick and reliable transportation links to the rest of the country. Basically, these cities were left to fend for themselves for much of their early existence and relied primarily on natural resource boom and bust cycles to drive early populations of people. This would include the 1849 gold rush to Northern California. As the decades went on and transportation and livability technologies improved, other major cities have been developed and established as major population centers throughout the middle of the country. Boise, Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Denver all were incorporated between 1860 and 1900. From there, the western half of the country began to develop and population grew steadily. While that's all well and good, there has been one area of the United States that hasn't grown all that much. This large belt that cuts the contiguous United States in half is empty by comparison. The population distribution of a country is always an interesting story. If one specific region is growing faster than others, there is a story behind that growth. Likewise, if a region is relatively underpopulated, there is also a story behind that. Nowhere else in the rest of the contiguous United States is there such a large connected piece of land that is so relatively empty. The entire area stretching from the Canadian border to the Mexican border is just about 350,000 square miles in size. To put this number in perspective, if this area was its own state, it would be larger than any current existing state aside from Alaska, which is about 570,000 square miles. All told, it makes up approximately 12% of the contiguous United States land area. But while its size is vast, that's only half the picture. The total population of this belt is just 3.1 million people, or less than 1% of the United States' total population. That's almost equal to the population of the metropolitan area of Denver, Colorado. In every other region of the contiguous United States, multiple major population centers will break up the otherwise expanse of rural farms, mountains, or forests. And that is not to say there aren't any population centers within this belt, but they are still fairly small in scale. The largest population centers within the belt are Lubbock, Texas, Amarillo, Texas, Midland, Texas, Abilene, Texas, Rapid City, South Dakota, Bismarck, North Dakota, San Angelo, Texas, and Odessa, Texas. From there, population within cities and towns starts to drop quickly to very low levels. Texas has the vast majority of the belt's population, so we have established that for its size and geographic position within the United States, the belt is definitely underpopulated compared to other areas. The only question now is why this is the case. As with most things in geography and history, there is never really a single answer. Instead, it is a confluence of things that form to create the present-day scenario. In this case, we have roughly 3 reasons why this belt has been left so underpopulated. The first and most prominent reason likely lies within a few Native American tribes that put up some of the fiercest resistance to the U.S. military at the time of westward expansion. Within this belt of land lies 5 historic tribes: the Sioux tribe, Cheyenne tribe, Kiowa tribe, Comanche tribe, and the Apache tribe. These tribes all tirelessly and with great effort attempted to stop the U.S. military and U.S. settlers from encroaching on their ancestral lands. By the late 1800s, the tribes were unfortunately decimated and forced to relocate to reservations. But by that time, development within much of the western half of the country had already outpaced this region, leading to it already being well underdeveloped. While indigenous tribes putting up resistance was certainly a contributing factor during the early years of settlement, it does not account for why the land wasn't heavily developed afterwards. Much of this is due to the effect the Rocky Mountain Range has on the area immediately to the east of it. The Rocky Mountains create a rain shadow effect, wherein moisture is built up on the western side of the mountains, precipitation is dropped throughout the range, and then nothing is left for the eastern side. This creates an area that is mostly either arid or otherwise downright cold and inhospitable for traditional settlement patterns. According to the Köppen climate method of determining climate across geographies, this particular belt is 64% arid steppe or arid deserts, 28% cold and dry climate, and only 8% temperate. This means that any sort of real agriculture, a primary motivator for settling in the 1800s and early 1900s, was very limited in scope and potential. But there is one more thing that still deters population moving to this region: wild temperature fluctuations. If you've ever heard about an area going from about 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 30 degrees Fahrenheit in the course of a single day, it is probably from this particular region or close to it. This largely has to do with the continentality of this area, which allows for polar winds to drop into the region fairly quickly, similar to what we have seen happen in recent times. All that's to say, weather is a huge reason why people do or do not move to some place, and this region does not have mild weather conditions that attract large numbers of people. No country in the world is equally distributed in terms of population across all regions, and most people move for economic reasons. If a city or region is growing or shrinking, it is likely due to the economy and job opportunities available. For the belt, there is just not a whole lot of reasons for people to move there, and there are active aspects such as the weather and climate that actively prevent people from moving there in significant numbers. For those reasons, the area will likely remain underpopulated well into the future. This underpopulated belt serves as a reminder of how historical events such as Native American resistance, combined with the powerful influences of mountain ranges on climate and the effects of continentality on weather patterns, have shaped the human landscape of the United States in profound and lasting ways. People tend to gravitate toward areas with better economic prospects, milder climates, and easier living conditions, all of which this central belt has historically lacked in comparison to coastal and eastern regions. The interplay of these factors ensures the area remains sparsely settled even today.